Stay up to date on your latest weather from the largest team of meteorologists in the Southeast. Download the free.
Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
A stunning immigration raid in a small southeast Georgia town last week continues to have national reverberations here in Georgia and across the nation, and has perhaps cast a entirely different light on one of outgoing Georgia Governor Brian Kemp's cornerstone economic development achievements. Today is Wednesday, September 10th, and this is your On the Record midweek podcast and stream from Atlanta News First, where we take a look at some of the national issues that are making headlines throughout the nation and that could also have implications here in Georgia. I'm Tim Darnell, joined as always by my friend and colleague Rick Folbaum. Our producer today is Maria Moreau. Rick, this Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement operations took place in a town that even I, as an Atlanta and Georgia native, have never heard of, Ellaville, Georgia. Passed through I-16 on my way to Savannah and Georgia's coast many times. Never heard of it, had to look it up on a map, but it is the site of the largest single site operation ever in the Department of Homeland's history. Department of Homeland Security was obviously founded in November 2022. More than 500 Korean national workers were detained in this operation. The site is owned by Hyundai and another Korean national company called LG Energy Solutions. This is a battery manufacturing plant. We understand that there were no direct employees of Hyundai who were detained. We have been told that these were workers who were contractors and subcontractors who were performing operations in highly skilled work at this battery manufacturing plant to support Hyundai Automotive. 500 detained, many are already on their way back to South Korea.
Yeah, I mean, and this has caused a number of different issues here between the United States and South Korea, for example. Real diplomatic row between the two countries. South Korea not happy with the way its citizens were treated here in the U.S. As we speak, there is a South Korean charter jet that is making its way to Atlanta. And we expect a lot of those who were rounded up in this raid to be put onto this airplane later this morning and flown back to South Korea, where they'll arrive tomorrow afternoon. But that's one issue. The other issue, as you mentioned, is statewide here in Georgia, where Governor Kemp has really sort of staked his reputation, or a large chunk of it, on his push and drive and desire to make Georgia the EV state, and have a bunch of these electric vehicle type of companies come and build here, invest in Georgia, and then eventually employ Georgians. Now, as you said, these people that were rounded up are not Georgians. So we've been asking questions. Well, when are the Georgians supposed to get these jobs? And what we've learned is that with these particular jobs, at least in the initial building phases, which is what this plant was in at the time, that a lot of the equipment and materials that are used, and even the instruction manuals that are used, are all printed in the language of the home country, and so really American workers who are not familiar with Korean, for example, would have had a very difficult time handling these jobs, which is why immigration law does allow foreign workers to come over to the United States. Now, we've heard from President Trump that these workers were here illegally, but we're beginning to hear from some defense attorneys and others, some leaked reports that are just out today, actually, that show that at least one of the workers who was rounded up did have the proper documentation to be here in this country. This is a special visa that is granted. It's called a B1, B2 visa that allows foreign nationals to come into the United States and work under certain circumstances and certain conditions. And so we've heard from defense attorneys saying that there are others. So I think a lot of questions, first of all, in terms of these kinds of raids, immigration raids. This happened in Georgia. Is this the kind of thing that we'll see happening at other plants around the country? Involving other foreign countries that have come here and are investing in the United States, and number two, were some of these people that were rounded up wrongly? Did they, in fact, have the proper documentation to be here? And if they did, what does that say about the Trump administration's immigration policies, which have been, as we know and as we've been reporting, a big part of President Trump's second term in office, his pledge to get illegal people who are here in the country illegally out of the country. He's been very aggressive in that. And it seems as though that the Trump administration is going to be undeterred by this. What this means for Governor Kemp and his legacy going forward, as you say, he's the outgoing governor. He is term limited and cannot run for a third term. But a lot of people have been looking at his record over the last several years here in Georgia, thinking that perhaps he could be a candidate in the future for a national office or another statewide office as well, but perhaps even a national office. And is something like this the kind of thing that could derail those plans? It certainly would perhaps give any kind of opponent, either a Republican in a primary race or a Democrat in a general election against him, at least a tool, something that can be used to criticize him with, depending on how all of this shakes out.
You mentioned that we've heard from some defense attorneys who are operating on behalf of some of the Korean nationals who were detained. I have a couple of quotes I want to read. First, both of these are from the White House. First, Tom Homan, who is widely known as the White House quote-unquote border czar. We're going to do more worksite enforcement operations. These companies that hire illegal aliens, they undercut their competition that's paying U.S. citizen salaries. Another quote from White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt from yesterday. The president, he understands that these companies want to bring their highly skilled and trained workers with them, especially when they're creating very niche products like chips, or in this case in Georgia, like batteries. But the president also expects these foreign companies to hire American workers and for these foreign workers and American workers to work together and to train and teach one another. Is there a disconnect between perhaps some of the political rhetoric that we hear when political leaders tout overseas investment in their state and that we're going to be creating jobs for our local and statewide residents, as opposed to perhaps some of the priorities that these foreign companies actually bring when they open up an operation here in Georgia or elsewhere? Is there a disconnect between the political rhetoric and the reality?
Well, I think you're right. I think that there is, and I would say that the media is in part to blame here, because it really is our job, I think, to monitor all of these different transactions and deals that the governor in our state is involved with, and especially when it has to do with taxpayers. We are supposed to be the ones sort of looking into all of this, and yes, it's complicated, but I feel like perhaps a lot of typical, Georgia taxpayers really were unaware and may still be unaware of exactly how this process works. Admittedly, it was something that I was not fully familiar with myself until this story broke, and obviously we started to do some research and make some phone calls and start talking to people about it. But you look at the numbers that are touted when deals like this are announced, and Hyundai, in return for its investment in Georgia, Hyundai was given about $2.1 billion in incentives. That's real money. That's taxpayer money. Basically, you can sort of move the numbers around, but at the end of the day, those are taxes that a company like Hyundai would have paid into our state coffers that are not being paid. And so that's the whole incentive, the sort of carrot that's offered to these countries to come over here. But what does that mean? And when is there a return on that investment? I think that those are questions that people need answers to. Again, I think that falls on the media to get those answers for people. And, as the Trump administration ramps up these workplace raids, and as you quoted, the borders they're going to continue. I think we're all going to need to become more familiar with exactly what kind of arrangements are made, what kind of promises are made. And then at the end of the day, if there is a disconnect, let's talk about the reality here of what this is actually going to mean for people when these plants are up and running and functioning. When are taxpayers in Georgia and in other states around the country going to start seeing the benefits of that?
I'm interested to see how this will affect Georgia's governor's race. We obviously have a nationally watched gubernatorial contest coming up next year. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones, Attorney General Chris Carr are the major candidates on the Republican side. On the Democratic side, we have 5 Democrats who are hoping to become Georgia's first elected Democratic Party governor in the 21st century coming up, as well as perhaps the first black or minority governor ever elected in Georgia history. One of those candidates, Jason Estevez, we are expecting major news coming later today, and it's just thanks to the hard work and perseverance of political reporter Doug Reardon. Jason Estevez will be the featured newsmaker interview on this Sunday's On the Record with Atlanta News First, airing every Sunday at 11 a.m. Talk to me a little bit about how you believe the issue of economic development will play out in the Georgia governor's race, and perhaps even taking it a little bit further. We talk about Georgia's historically low performing SAT scores and our lower educational scores. Is perhaps the entire economic development issue as far as foreign companies unable to hire qualified domestic workers, could that play out into an overall discussion, a worthwhile discussion, I think, regarding the state's public educational and vocational educational system?
Well, first of all, you mentioned Doug's interview, which will take place later today with Senator Estevez, and I really can't stress to you how much I'm looking forward to this, because I really want to hear what he has to say. He has emerged as, perhaps maybe the dark horse candidate, but I've got to tell you that in my conversations with both Democrats and Republicans, his candidacy is really seen as perhaps the strongest on the Democratic side. Republicans say that he and Michael Thurman, who is another Democrat, former DeKalb County CEO, who has also announced his intention, his candidacy for the Democratic nomination, that the two of them may pose the biggest threat as far as the Republicans losing the governor's mansion here. What is it that they see about him? I think that they see someone who is dynamic, who is young, who is multi-ethnic, who has a lot of crossover appeal, and even though he, is a state lawmaker, state legislator who has big name recognition here in Atlanta, they feel like perhaps he's someone that as people around the rest of the state start to hear about him and start to hear some of his ideas, that he will be very appealing to them. And so far what we've heard from Estevez is that he is going to focus on the economy. He is going to focus on education. And I think that this election taking place in a mid-year election cycle is something that could potentially help a Democratic candidate, whoever that candidate ends up being. We talk a lot about traditionally how parties make out during midterm elections, and the rule goes, and this is obviously not a hard fact. It's it hasn't happened every time, but the rule typically is that the party that's in power in the White House will lose seats in the Congress. Now, is there a trickle-down effect, and does that also impact statewide races around the country, like our governor's race here in Georgia? It'll be interesting to see, and it's still early. But I think that if the economy continues to look weak as it does right now, if prices and inflation don't come down more than they have, and if President Trump's policies, whether it has to do with immigration or any of the other policies that his administration is putting forth, if they're not seen positively and viewed favorably by people here in Georgia, that is something that I think voters could carry with them into the election booth next November. Not this coming November, but a year from this November, when they go in and vote. Are they going to want to vote for another Republican while there's already a Republican who's in the White House, and while Republicans, at least at this point, have control over both houses of Congress?
The 2026 midterm elections even though are about a year away, the political season is heavy upon us. And we here at Atlanta News First and On the Record with Atlanta News First will continue to bring you all of the latest breaking updates. We encourage you to watch and listen to all of our podcasts on all of our streaming channels, as well as watch every Sunday morning, 11 a.m., Must-See TV. On the Record with Atlanta News First, broadcast at 11 a.m. every Sunday, weekly political wrap-up show hosted by Rick Volbaum and Doug Reardon. For all of us here at Atlanta News First and On the Record, I'm Tim Darnell. Thanks for watching and listening to your midweek national political update with On the Record with Atlanta News First.
Thank you for watching A&F Plus. For more breaking news, live coverage, and your community stories, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch us on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. To join the conversation on YouTube Live, visit our channel and hit subscribe. You can also listen to the Atlanta News First podcast by searching Atlanta News First on your preferred listening platform.